Hi, in this video, we're going to go over basically how to do a redirect countdown in JavaScript. So we've got some HTML here. We've got a paragraph tag. It says this page will redirect in 10 seconds. And then in that message, you put a span tag with you could put any ID here around the 10 and a span tag around the S. Okay, and so that should be essentially all you need to do in order to get started. So if we go to the JavaScript portion here, we'll be doing this in CodePen, and it should be pretty easy. The first thing we're going to do is going to wrap this all in an event. So we'll say window.onload equals function. This is a don't do this until the window is loaded. That's just a good idea to not run any really code completely globally. The next thing we want to do is we're going to want to get the things we're going to change. So the content in this span, content in this span, content in this one into variables. So we'll use const because we don't intend to change these variables. We'll call num is equals document get element ID. We'll do the same thing for plural. Const equals document. So it's document is the whole HTML document. Get element by ID plural. So the first thing you should notice here is anytime you're repeating essentially verbatim any code, you should think, is there a way I can put this in one spot and not repeat it later on? In this case, there is. So just walking you through the thought process, even though eventually you'll get to the point where you won't even have to change things because you've repeated, because you'll just avoid repeating in the first place. So we'll do what's called a Lambda function, const, and we'll call it ID. I like to start my Lambda function names with an underscore just so I can keep track of them better. And a Lambda function is a function that follows this notation. So arguments in parentheses, a fat arrow, so an equals and then a greater than sign is called a fat arrow, and then some expression. And the expression is what the function is going to return, so the value it's going to give. And so we're going to want to get things by their ID. So we're going to need an ID name. So we'll say ID is the input, and then the output is going to be document.get element by ID. And we're going to use whatever ID is put into it. That allows us to come over here and just replace this with ID. Do the same thing here. So just get the ID using this code, and if we ever wanted to make it more fancy, so it does something else in the meantime, then we can just go back to this one function that does it all. Next step here is we're going to want to start a counter timer. So we could do this with the function set interval, or the function set timeout. I'm going to use set interval here because it doesn't really matter. There are reasons why you'd want to use set timeout, but they're not applicable here. So we'll just use set interval, and it will return an integer, so a number. I'm going to spell this here. That will allow us to clear the interval later if we want to. That's not super important. So I'll just store that that integer, that number, the interval ID, in a variable, so you can see how it would be done. But it's not super important here. So the first thing you're going to put in the interval is a function. The second thing is the time in milliseconds. So we want this to change every 1 second. So we're going to put 1000 milliseconds, and that'll give us every second it's going to change. in this function, we'll tell it what to do. So first off, an important thing to note here is that this is called a closure, right? A closure is when you have a function and it can still access things within an outer function. So this is a function, but it's in a function here, the onload function. And this function can access variables declared here. This is a structure that we use in JavaScript a lot. Notice though that if we were to execute code like down here, this code could not access these variables. So that's a very important structure you're going to see a lot. You don't need to go into why it's so important right now, but just keep an eye out for that. And then in later videos when you see this used, you'll be able to understand it a little bit better. So every second, what we want to do is we're going to want to change the number to the correct number of seconds. So we'll need to store here first. We use let because we plan on changing it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say current num minus to decrease the current number. Then we'll say num.inner text. This puts it inside here. So that's a countdown. The next thing we need to do is we need to adjust plural. So we need to say if num equals, current num equals 1, say inner text equals 0. Equals nothing. Else plural dot inner text equals s. If you go ahead and watch it now, as it gets to 1, it should change. And then it gets back to 0. It goes back to seconds because you say 0 seconds. Also remember here, 3 equals means we're testing to see if it's the very exact same thing. Now, 2 equals would work just fine here, right? We don't need to get all the way to 1 for it to see that. But it's nice to know what it means. And if you can use the 3 equal signs in a row, do it because it's a more strict comparison. And this is asking, this expression here is asking, does current num equal 1? And remember, a single equal sign is assignment. The last thing to do here is to redirect. So we'll say if, actually I should say else if, and here we should do this up here. This is all based off of current num. Else if current num equals 0. Actually, you should probably do -1. No, because we've already assigned it. So I'll do 0. Now we're going to redirect. So I'll say, I'm going to do this in a comment so it doesn't redirect until I want it to. You're going to say window.location.href equals www.go.com. Okay, so this will set this value to Google. Now, the reality is we don't want to redirect because it'll be hard for you to see what's going on. So just as a test, you can see this first. we'll do this. When it gets to 1, we should be able to see a hash up here. Or when it gets to 0, rather. 2, 1, 0. Well, sure, it was just a silly mistake down here. There we go. So Google doesn't like to be loaded in an iframe. But you can see that it tried. And so now it goes back to the original document. And we're going to comment this out because we don't want it to go every 10 seconds to Google. But you can see how you can set a counter, and then the counter is going to, when it gets to 0, take you to somewhere else. So if you don't do this in CodePen, it will actually send, if you do it in an actual web page, it will actually send you to the correct place. And that's it for this video. See you soon.